Did you know that God cares about our relationships and it begins in the home? Let's talk about it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Did You Know? I'm Tristan and I'm here with Rabbi Ira. And what are we talking about today?
Today, Tristan, we're going to continue our discussion, our conversation about the letter that the Apostle Paul, Rav Shaul, wrote to the believers in Ephesus called Ephesians. And so we've been covering a lot of foundational principles about walking in the light, for instance, and following God's ways, which is a blessing that we get. But now Paul's getting into some specifics about how it applies in our most important relationships, starting with husband and wife. So we're going to pick it up in chapter 5, verse 21, and we're going to go through the different relationships, husband and wife, children and parents, and employees and employers, and so on. So let's pick it up there.
All right, starting in verse 21. Also submit yourselves to one another out of reverence for Messiah. Wives, to your own husbands, as to the Lord. For the husband is head of the wife, as Messiah also is head of his community, himself the Savior of the body. But as Messiah's community is submitted to Messiah, so also the wives to their husbands in everything.
You know, this passage often is so misunderstood. Have you experienced that?
Yes, you beat me to the question, but continue.
Yeah, well, I've had men come to me over the years and say, my wife won't submit to me.
Yeah.
Right? And first of all, there's a couple of fallacies there. One is, what is the meaning of submit?
Right.
And secondly, the first part of that, the part that goes alongside wives submit to the husband as well. And before that even is submit yourselves to one another. Yeah. So the word for submit in the Greek has the connotation of walking together, almost like a military parade. They're marching together. And I think that is lost so much in this concept of submission to one another. We didn't get to the part about husbands love your wives. We'll get to that in a moment. But wives submit to your husbands, but it doesn't work unless the husband is submitted to God.
Yes.
And what does that mean? It means that he is willing to receive correction from God, but also from others, from spiritual leaders. And going back to my first statement, is I've had men that come, well, my wife won't submit to me. Yeah, but I know you well enough to know that you're not submitted to God and you're not submitted to your leadership. Right? And that it all works together.
Yeah, and like you had said, submit to one another in love. And so are you also submitted to your wife in some capacity to serve her and love her as Christ loved the church, which we'll get into. And it says that in verse 25, husbands, love your wives, just as Messiah also loved his community and gave himself up for her to make her holy, having cleansed her by immersion in the word. Having cleansed her by immersion in the word. Messiah did this so that he might present to himself his glorious community, not having stain or wrinkle or any such thing, but in order that she might be holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself.
Yeah, years ago, when the Promise Keepers movement was really going, Coach Bill McCartney was he was the coach of the University of Colorado, football coach, and he founded the movement. And one of the things that's always stuck with me that he taught about was you can always tell the spiritual condition of a man by looking at his wife.
Wow.
Right? What does that mean? Well, if the husband is doing what God called us to do as husbands, love your wife as Messiah loved the congregation, the church. And how did he love it?
He died for
He died for us. Are you willing to lay down your life for your wife? And, it takes on a lot of different ways, serving and helping her and so on. Doesn't mean we become a a doormat to our wives. It's not what it means. It just means that if the wife is being treated the way God designed the marriage relationship to be, then her countenance is going to be, it's going to be seen in her countenance, in her demeanor, and so on. Her attitude is going to be good. She's going to be smiling. She's going to be happy, and you can tell. Versus a woman that's down. And it's not always the man's fault, but it's a big part of it.
Yeah.
Right?
Can you share maybe some part of how this is related in your own life, in your marriage?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. Now you want to get personal with me?
Yes, they want to know. The people want to know.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share it. So when Gloria and I got married, neither one of us were really believers. She was raised Southern Baptist, but she'd walked away from the Lord. And I was raised Jewish, but really wasn't practicing that. But we got married and started struggling right away. She came to faith about 6 months after we got married. I came a couple years later. Some of you maybe have heard my story and whatnot. But this whole idea of serving and being sacrificial was a foreign concept to me. So as I grew in the faith, and even as we started the ministry, Gloria was always a natural servant, right? And but I didn't have that in me so much. It wasn't like one of my gifts, serving. But I watched her serve in the early days of the congregation, and I got convicted. Like, okay. But then we were also having struggles in our marriage, and one of the things that God spoke to me about was would I let him love her through me? And part of that was beginning to serve her. So what did that mean? Well, practical things, like doing stuff around the house, cooking. Now I do all the cooking. And I love cooking, but she cleans. So we've worked it out, right? So it's going to look different for different people. But over the years, God's really impressed upon me the importance of, as Messiah loved me, died for me, so too I should be willing to die to self, right? In terms of my serving my wife and others too.
Was it hard for you?
Yeah, it was hard at first, but as I began to really practice it, there was the blessing because I could see it in her,
right?
In the countenance. Going back to what I said before, her countenance was elevated, and her attitude was more loving and caring and so on.
Which ultimately came back to you then, to recognize the unity in your marriage.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, again, there's boundaries there. It's not like I'm always responsible for her emotional state. That's not what it is. But there's a part that I have to play in that as far as how God sees the husband's role.
So good. Thank you for your vulnerability at this time.
That's all right.
You never know when I'm going to just put you on the spot.
That's
tell
okay.
us the story.
I can take it. And hopefully there's men that are out there listening, watching.
If you're having marriage issues, you can email Rabbi Ira.
Happy to help.
All right. Verse 29. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Messiah also does his community, because we are members of his body. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is great, but I am talking about Messiah and his community. In any case, let each of you love his own wife as himself, and let the wife respect her husband.
That is so good, right? So, the quote here from Genesis, right? For this reason, a man shall leave his father's home and
father and mother be joined
to his wife. And in the Hebrew originally in Genesis, the word for join is davak, which means glue. Literally, it's the word for glue in modern Hebrew. So the idea here is that we're joined together. We're stuck with each other. No, I don't mean that. But we're glued together, a husband and wife. When they become one.
Yeah.
Right? Now, we don't lose our individual personalities or giftings or anything like that. It's not that. But we become one in Messiah. We become one in emotionally, we can become one. Spiritually, we become one. Even financially, socially, and all that. And sometimes that means shedding some of the other relationships that we've had, right? So that we can truly honor each other in that context of relationship. But the part that Paul is using the marriage as a metaphor for is the relationship between Messiah and the community, Messiah and the church, right? And his body. When we say church, we're talking about the universal body of Messiah, Jews and Gentiles together, whatever denomination or whatever.
That have put their faith in Yeshua.
Yeah, those that put their faith in Yeshua and believe the Bible, the basics of the faith. That's the mystery of how Messiah is one, as a husband and wife are one with the community, right?
Yep. It goes on, and we're actually going to pick up into Ephesians 6 because it continues in orderly relationships, and so it talks about the parents, and so Ephesians 6 verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord.
Yeah. So what is the promise that goes with the command to honor your mother and father?
It says that it would go well with you and that you have long life.
Long life, exactly. And as Paul says, it's the first commandment with a promise. Of course, Paul being a scholarly rabbi, knows the Torah, knows the Tanakh, and he's quoting right out of the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20, and repeated in Deuteronomy 5. And so, what does that mean? Children, obey your parents. I mean, you can't get more plain than that, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's always in this area of submission and obedience. There's always a caveat. There's always like, okay, if a husband tells his wife to do something that's contrary to the scripture, then the wife is under no obligation to obey that. Just like we're in Romans 12, where it says that we're to obey the authorities, the governmental authorities.
Right.
Yeah, but there's a caveat with that, because there's a balance. That no, if the government restricts our religious freedom, and of course in the United States we're blessed to have religious freedom, but there's countries that don't, and a lot of countries where even the church in Nazi Germany oftentimes quoted that, saying, "Oh, we need to submit to Hitler because he's the government," quoting, that verse in Romans. But no, there's caveat. There's a balance in that. And so in the same application here, for children, yes. However, if parents are, ungodly and commanding children to do things that are not right, the children could say, "No, Mom, I'm not going to do that." But generally, we want to follow that, right?
Yeah. I think I'm even learning that in my relationship with my parents, the honor and submission aspect. And there's just a lot to that. I feel I can relate with maybe some younger people watching this with their parents. And, well, how do I honor my parents that maybe I don't feel like they deserve my respect and my honor, or they're embittering me. It says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And
right. So that's a good point. So how would a father, but it could be a mother as well,
right,
provoke a child to anger?
Yeah.
What would that look like in real life?
I think it's ways of coming across as disrespect to the kids, or being like, do it because I said so, and like, don't ask questions, just causing this consistent strife. And I do think there's a time for because I said so, and I submit to that. I get that I don't need to know all things and have you sit here and explain every single action you do. I also think that it's kindness at times for a parent to explain and take the time to meet me where I'm at with something I might be wrestling with, or talking poorly about me or disrespectfully about me to other people. And it is gossip about your child. If my mom were to be going to some of her friends or people in our community and saying, my daughter never cleans her room and she's always talking back to me and she's does this and that, it hurts.
And that would provoke you to anger.
Yeah.
Right? And so in the context here...
and my mom doesn't do that. That's just an example.
No, right. And of course, there's a difference, I believe, between children. When we talk about children, we're talking about little ones, right? That are growing up. And they need to be taught, right? Discipline, the Book of Proverbs talks about disciplining our children, whatever that looks like. But provoking to anger could be something like you're exploding on your children because they did something that they weren't supposed to do, whatever, instead of teaching them. God's discipline, when God disciplines us, it's for us to learn how to do things differently, right? Instead of making that dumb mistake that we did. And it's the same with our children, that we are to teach them. And sometimes it's necessary discipline, whether it's a timeout or even, God forbid, a spanking. Right? We used to use a paddle with our kids, but only when they were disrespectful or flagrantly disobeying what they know, what they shouldn't be doing. That's pretty much when it crosses the line. And so there's a lot of variance there. When I think about today, I don't know if you've heard this term, gentle parenting. Right. And I've seen it in action. And I'm thinking, I don't think that's what God had in mind. No. Right? I don't think kids learn right or wrong. I think it's really indulging and spoiling them to an extent.
There's both gentleness and kindness. And there's also,
of course,
discipline. It's both hand in hand.
There's got to be a balance there.
Yeah. And the last thing quickly before we go on to the workplace that I'd love to share about that is because you had mentioned the children aspect. And I think for me, I'm in my 20s, so there's a different relatability to that. Is I'm still a child to my parents, but I'm not 7. Right.
So I think that it changes.
It changes.
Yeah, and you're not a child.
Yeah.
And so as a parent myself of adult children, the relationship changes. But that really, I believe that needs to start earlier on. So you don't treat a 14 or 15-year-old in your house as you would when they were 7 or 8, right?
It changes.
And some people try to do that, and it just creates more distance in the relationship.
Right.
So you have to give them more responsibility and teach them how to apply the responsibility they're being given. And then, of course, when they get to driving age, okay, now that's a whole nother thing, right? But you have to trust them if they've proven that they're trustworthy.
Yeah.
As they do that, you give them more and more responsibility. But then it comes a point where they're going off to college, going off to live on their own. Okay, yeah, you're still a parent, and maybe if you're still paying the bills, you have a little more say-so. Right. But still, the relationship needs to change. You need to start treating them like an adult and not like a child, because that's just going to breed resentment to them.
Man, I think
and rebellion.
Yes, through all of these different times and seasons, we just got to abide in the Lord. It talks about abiding the vine and the branches and just seeking God diligently each day. And it really is just a marathon, not a sprint with God in all of these seasons. Raising kids like
it's
that.
really good. And if we try to do it that way as it progresses, then when they become adults and parents themselves, they can, our kids oftentimes say, yeah, I learned it from you guys, as far as how to teach their children.
Right.
And we have a great relationship with all 5 of our kids. They're all obviously grown and married and have kids and so on. And it's great. So if we follow the biblical patterns, people say, oh, that was written thousands of years ago. No, it still applies today. If we apply the principles, then we get the benefit and the blessings.
Yes. And it goes on with that in verse 5. Says one word, pause, so you can explain.
Right.
It starts off, slaves, obey your human masters with respect and reverence, with sincerity of heart, as you would the Messiah.
Yeah. So you want to talk about
just real quick, like a one sentence.
Yeah. Of course, if we read this through the lens of today, we go, what? What do you mean
God
slaves?
supports slavery.
Yeah,
Oh my
what
gosh.
is this? Why don't you just say, masters, free your slaves? That's wrong. Why? No, because in the context of the culture, slavery wasn't what necessarily what we think about today,
Right.
and chains and whips. And no, they were house servants. They were people that were trusted often with the work of the home or the fields or whatever. It wasn't always implying that they were abused. Today, we, obviously don't believe in slavery. But yet, Paul was not shaking up the culture of the day, except to say that as a slave, obey human masters with respect and reverence. Today, we could apply that to employees.
I was just about to say, it's basically an employee.
Yeah.
Like, I'm working for someone else, for a different organization, and I have rewards to that and benefits of that and freedoms to that.
Yeah.
It's just a different...
And oftentimes, in the Roman world, slaves were given a huge amount of responsibility and privilege. And oftentimes, for men, parents, women, couples that didn't have children, or even sometimes if they did, they ended up adopting those slaves and giving them the inheritance.
Right.
So it's not always what we think of. There were abuses as well.
And God talks about that, though, about what not to do. So we'll get there.
Yeah, and actually it goes back to the Torah, where God told the Israelites, when you have slaves, here's how you treat them, not like you were treated in Egypt.
Right.
So this is a carryover from the
God does not support
the Old
abuse
Testament.
at
That's
all.
right.
That is not the character of God.
Right.
It says, not just under your master's eye as people pleasers, but as slaves of Messiah, doing God's will from the soul.
Wow.
I love that.
Yeah, what a analogy, right?
Slaves of Messiah.
Yeah.
Workers
Wait a
of
second.
the kingdom of God.
I'm a slave of Yeshua? Yes.
Yes.
But not in the way that a modern...
Working for him, with
Right.
him.
With him. We are committed to him. He is our master.
Right. Serve with a positive attitude as to the Lord and not to men, knowing that whatever good each one does, this he will receive back from the Lord, whether slave or free. And masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Stop using threats, knowing that the master of them and of you too is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. So there we have it.
Yeah. So the admonition to the employees or slaves here is the same admonition that he's giving to the master or the employer, right? And we can apply it today. If you own a company, you have employees, treat them well, right? It's not only a benefit to you, but it's also a blessing and benefit to the people. You're blessing them, but also God is saying, hey, this is the right order.
Right.
There's an order. God is a God of order. We start out husbands and wives. There's an order there. Parents and children obey. Order there. Order in the workplace. It's very practical.
Yeah, and there's a blessing to unity. Such a blessing to unity, not division. Submitting to one another, like we had said, in love. And so I loved just this whole chapter about order and honor, submission. It's so beautiful when we submit it all into the Lord's hands.
Ultimately, he is the object of our submission.
Yeah. So we hope that this was an encouragement to you guys and really spoke into the relationships that you have in the workplace, parents and children, wives and husbands, relationally, to just honor one another above yourselves, submit to one another in love. And ultimately, there's one judge, one lawgiver, and it's God. And so we're all in submission to him. We love you guys. Like, comment, subscribe, share, and then we will see you next week to jump into Ephesians 6, the armor of God. Okay, bye.
Thank you for watching, and please like, comment, subscribe, and share to our Shalom Boca YouTube channel, and we'll see you next week.